Now in this video, we're going to look at how to get your images out of Photoshop so that you can hand them over to your developer to start building the website. Now what they're going to want is some web-ready images, okay, not just the big Photoshop file. If your developer does use Photoshop, then potentially you could just hand over this PSD and leave them to it, but often it's the designer's role to get the images out ready for web. There are pretty much two formats we're going to work with. There's going to be a JPEG and a PNG. Now, essentially, JPEGs are great for photographs and PNGs are really great for any kind of linear icons, logos, text, those types of things. It's reasonably easy to know which one to use because it comes down to file size versus quality. If it looks great and it's small, then you should be using that format. Okay, so you check both of them, JPEG versus PNG, see which is the smallest, see what looks the best, and then use that. We're using a new feature in Photoshop CC 2015. If you're using an earlier version, you're going to have to use something called the slice tool. Okay, but because we're using the newer version, we're going to use this fancy, awesome way called the export as. So to do it, let's look at doing this image first. Okay, so I've selected in my layers, there's this image sitting on top of the box. It doesn't really matter which one you export, okay, whether it's the box or the image, it'll work for both of them. So what we're going to do is right click it, and we're going to go down to this one that says export as. When we get onto when we know it's a PNG, we can use a quick export, but at the moment, I know because it's an image, it's going to be a JPEG. So I'm going to go export as. Okay, so it tells me the size and it tells me that as a PNG, this one's going to be set at 76 kilobytes, and that's pretty big. So you've got a relative scale. Once you start getting close to 100, that's far too big for an image this size. Okay, so when you're at 100 kilobytes, you're way kind of above what it should be. So what we can do is switch it to JPEG. And then you've got this quality slider. Very rarely does it go out at 100%. You want to drag it down until you've got this kind of balance of it's very small in terms of file sizes, but there's almost no noticeable degrading of the image. So what you do is you drag it right down to something silly. Okay, so we're down at 15%, and it's hard to know, is it good, is it bad? Okay, what I like to do, just click up here, and click back down, and decide how low can you go? Now in this case, it can get quite low. Because the image itself is quite noisy and it's black and white, we can get away with quite a lot of low quality, but you can see the size becoming quite low. So when it's up at 100, it's at a reasonably good 38 kilobytes, but I can get it a lot lower. Now, my rules, I kind of hang around in the between 30 and 60 depending on the image. So this one can go quite low because it is quite noisy. So at 30% of its original quality, we're at 12 kilobytes, and that's a nice fine size for me. I'm going to hit export. The last thing you need to do is when you are exporting this, I'm going to hit this little option here so I can see. I'm going to put it on my desktop. I'm going to put it in a special folder called web ready images that I've made. The only thing you need to know that when you are naming your images, okay, is you need to make sure there's no spaces, and you need to make sure you don't use any of the crazy characters that are along the top of your keyboard. So just keep it to numbers and letters and make sure there are no spaces. Okay, I'm going to hit export, and that's my JPEG out. Now we can move around. Let's say it's my portfolio here. I'm going to, doesn't really matter which of these two boxes I select, but I can right click it and say export as, and hopefully it'll remember what I last did. Okay, so 30%. Now you can see in this case, 30% is not great for me. Okay, if I drag it up to 100, it might be hard to see on the video that you're watching unless you're in HD, okay, but it is at 30%, it's not great. So different images will allow you to go higher and lower depending on the quality of them and what stuff's in them. Okay, so I told you I kind of go up to about a high of 60. Okay, in this case, I might go just a little bit higher because the trade-off is, can you see down here, we're at 5 kilobytes, so something that's quite small. So I'm gonna hit export. Great, and that's going to be portfolio 1. It's taken the name off the layer. Okay, so when you are naming your layers and you want to save some time later on, is to use hyphens instead of spaces. I like to use lowercase. Doesn't really matter when it comes to web design, but I like to keep consistent. Hit export. Great, so that's that one, and you can move through, export this one. Now what you can do is you can export lots at the same time. So I'm going to click portfolio 2, 3, and 4, right click, go to export as, and what will happen is it'll tile it on this left hand side here. So you have this one selected. Okay, 70% is fine, small. This one here, this one ends up at 7 kilobytes. Can you see the difference? They're the same size, but there's a lot of different content going along in this image. Okay, a lot more different colors and color variations. So this one's a lot higher, and you might be able to go a little bit lower in terms of the quality. Okay, it'll depend on your image. So work your way through them. Okay, this one looks great. This one looks fine. That one looks fine at 40. Maybe not, 60. We're going to click export. And the only problem with this though is that naming them, it's going to dump them all in this folder without putting our little hyphens in. So we can do that later. So it's exported them. I'm going to go and find it on my desktop. under web ready images, there is portfolio 1, 2, and 3. And I'm just gonna go do my, you'll save yourself a load of time later on by using lowercase if you want to, and make sure there's hyphens instead of spaces. Or you can use underscores, it doesn't really matter. Now the next format we're going to look at is PNG. So PNG format gets used when there's one of two things happen. That there is really flat graphics like these icons, okay, nice things like icons and fonts and logos. Anything that has a really static flat design to it comes out really good as a PNG. PNGs have a really good way of keeping nice crisp edges at really small file sizes. The other benefit of a PNG is that it uses transparency, whereas a JPEG doesn't. So I want these icons here to be see-through so that I can change the background color like this and it's still see-through. Okay, so I can go through, change the background color, and there's holes in the middle of here to show it through. Okay, if I use a JPEG, it doesn't allow me to do it. It has to have a solid background, can't be changed. It's the same here for these graphics here. Even though they're an image and I said JPEGs are great for images, in this case, I'm going to have to take the hit on file size to be a little bit larger because I want transparent background. And I'll show you why. This is a really good example to show you. So I'm going to find team 1. I'm going to right click it, and there's quick export as PNG. Now when you're new, okay, you're not too sure if it should be a PNG or not, you can use the export as, which is the slightly long way. So I've got the JPEG format, and you can see in JPEG that the quality, if I change it up to something like 70, the quality is what, 10 kilobytes, nice and small, but it's got this white background. The JPEG will not allow transparency, okay? It's not in its makeup. So we're gonna have to do with PNG, and we've got two kinds. There is PNG 8, which is fine, okay, and this file size is quite small, but the actual color palette it can use is actually quite small. It's only 256 colors. So if you want to use a full color PNG, you have to use this one up here, which is called a PNG 24, okay, even though they don't write it there. So PNG 8 versus PNG 4, you'll see the file size is substantially different, okay? This one here up to PNG 24, okay? This is really big, okay? But this is the trade-off of having transparency. JPEGs are really small, but graphics that have to have transparent backgrounds and have to use full color have to use this PNG here. Okay, so I'm gonna use full color PNG, hit export. Great, and team 1, click OK. Great, so I should now work through and do the same for the other two heads and the rest of the images here. Let's look at doing it for this icon along the top, and it will be the exact same process of exporting this image along the bottom here. I've got my icon, okay, and I know this needs to be a PNG. Why? Because it needs transparent background, which default makes it a PNG, and it is a nice flat graphic, which means it's going to be nice and small. Right click, and I could use my quick export as PNG now because I know it's going to be a PNG because it's flat graphics, it needs transparency, it's definitely a PNG. Okay, so I'm going to hit export as PNG, and I'm going to go straight to here, and I'm going to put it on my desktop under my web ready graphics, and I'm going to put it in there. Now I just work through the different icons and just say export as PNG. Let's have a quick look at the PNG size. So you can see this one here, 90 kilobytes, really big because it's a PNG trying to do what JPEGs do. But you can see PNGs with transparency doing what it does well. See, it's down to 2 kilobytes, nice and small. Okay, and these are the kinds of graphics that you're going to need to hand over to your web developer for your website build.